Pioneers of the Independent Networks. I'm your host, Ricky Blues. This is your co-host, Lord Timothy Walker. And joining us again this week for the second part of this episode is our very special guest, Jeff Capo. Jeff, welcome back.
Welcome. It's great to be here once again.
Absolutely. And friends, if you've joined us in the past, you know that we bring you all the characters, the matches, the promotions, the people that populate the Mid-Atlantic independent wrestling scene from the 1970s to today. That's always Tim's Iggy to give you our decades comment.
Yes, it makes me feel old.
Jeff, how about you? Do you feel old?
Constantly.
Constantly. So we're bringing you the second part of Unsung Heroes. And on this week's version, we're going to continue to look at the Unsung Heroes, but we're going to take a step back from what we did last week, where we talked about the ring performers. And this week, how about if we go to behind the scenes and let you guys run the show on that? What do you think?
Absolutely. We're gonna pull back that curtain a little bit and let everybody take a look at what goes on in the back.
I love it. That's awesome. So, folks, here we go. All right, Tim, we're going to turn to you, and we're going to save our special guest for last, because his portion of the topic is quite interesting. Tim, you take over.
When I think about unsung heroes in wrestling, I think about some of the promoters in that era.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ed Zahn.
Right.
And Dick Karakoff. And even a Joel Goodhart, who really changed the perception of independent wrestling. Up until the point where Joel started the TWA, independent wrestling was basically 10 or 12 local wrestlers thrown together at a National Guard armory in a broken down ring with perhaps maybe one former national star who was probably going to pull in a payday of $400 or $500, and the rest of the people on the show would be paid much less.
Yeah.
Hot dog and a handshake.
Yeah.
And
a lick and a promise.
Those cards looked like it too, because your perception was, look at this. This is really run down. And there aren't a lot of fans here. Mm-hmm. It just gave you that impression, what am I doing here?
Right.
And Joel and other independent promoters like Ed and Dick Karakoff really changed that perception of independent wrestling. Mm-hmm. Instead of being something that was just thrown together, when you went to one of their cards, you could see that it was much better organized, much better talent, and you could feel like you were actually at a AAA baseball game. Like, you could look at the talent that was in the ring and think, wow, with a break here or there, these are the people that I could be watching on television. That's the impression that I took away when I would go to a show that was promoted by Ed Zahn or a Dick Karakoff or Joel Goodhart, who developed these super shows that he promoted in Philadelphia and really turned the independent wrestling on its ear.
Right.
Instead of just having one star, Joel would bring in a dozen stars from all across the country, sparing probably little to no expense.
Right.
I can remember on some of those TWA events, bringing in people like Abdul the Butcher and the original Sheik, Owen Hart, mm-hmm. Jimmy Valiant, Adrian Street, Jerry Lawler, Ivan and Nikita Koloff, Al Perez, Stan Lane, Jim Cornette. The list just goes on and on.
Right.
Where else would you see a show like that? And it really changed independent wrestling, because after seeing that sort of a show, how could you go back to putting together some haphazard...
Right, a true spot show. I mean, it was just a spot show put on for the sake of being put on.
Right. How could you go back to seeing that? It really upped the whole game. It brought independent wrestling into a new light. People looked at it differently. It wasn't like, this is terrible stuff that you know, if you want to go see a bunch of 10-year-olds play baseball compared to the Red Sox and the Yankees and the Orioles, I mean, you're certainly free to do so, but it was such a diverse thing that you were looking at. It seemed like it was years away from what Joel Goodhart was putting on at that time. So you couldn't go back to that. People had to bring their games up at that point.
Well, and you were a part of that, Jeff, if you really think about it. We talked prior to filming today about how you and Ed looked at grassroots and making it a community-based program that would set the seeds in motion for exactly what Lord Timothy was just talking about.
Yeah, exactly, Ricky, because, again, what we wanted repeat fans. Mm-hmm. We wanted fans to come back. So we wanted to do those things. And where Ed was different from a lot of the other promoters that were going about it, Ed looked at it from a fan's perspective. As a fan, what do I want to see? Mm-hmm. What type of talent do I want to see? Now, we didn't have the funding that Joel did, which unfortunately caused Joel's demise as a promoter. So we tried to do the best with what we had. So what Ed wanted to do was try to develop that local talent to be the AAA. You talked about AAA baseball, which is a great analogy. He wanted to develop the talent that hopefully, as we talked about some of the guys who were almost there, he tried to get those guys, move them along to get that part, and then to do things like we talked about the printed programs and the posters and the flyers, to go out to these local businesses to try to get them to put ads in the program for two reasons. One, because we wanted to promote the local business, and two, if we got enough ads, we gave away the programs at the show. Mm-hmm. So as fans, you basically got a freebie. You got, hey, here's a program for you. It looked nice. We worked a lot on it to get it done, but it was one of those fun things. But, and Ed also, too, I think where Ed's big difference was he was willing to take a chance on people. I think that there were some people that we had that maybe people weren't looking at, and I'll use you as a perfect example. Again, because this was the era of the big man.
Right.
So Ed wanted to do something a little different. Ed wanted to bring, and Ed was obviously and still is very much a student of the game. He was watching those tapes because we didn't have internet. We didn't have that, but he would watch All Japan. He would watch the lucha stuff out of Mexico. He wanted to shake it up a little bit and not do the same type of matches all the time that everybody was doing. So that's how we set up the card, where we would have you, because we knew you could do those style of matches. Mm-hmm. And it really got the crowd interested. They're like, wow, we've never really seen this before, especially in the Northeast, where we weren't in the Southwest, we weren't in California, so we weren't seeing either mainly there was the lucha influence. Right. And, a lot of people, unless you were a serious tape trader, maybe didn't see All Japan or New Japan or, all that stuff that was coming out of there. So we were trying to mix it up a little bit and give some people a little bit of difference. But again, we were more of quality over quantity.
Absolutely.
And that's was our key that we wanted to do in that time frame. And again, if we had a big name star, we would try to do that. But we didn't bring them in to embarrass our local guys. Mm-hmm. We never jobbed anybody out. First of all, we hated squash matches because it was a waste of our time, and quite frankly, it was a waste of the fans' time. If you want to watch that, there's plenty of it on TV. You could watch it every week.
Highly competitive, gave it a purpose, gave people direction, and a product that they could hold on to and say, I want to come back next month to see what's going on.
And they would tell their friends, and et cetera and so forth. I mean, I literally had people come up to me and say they knew that Ed was running that show, no matter which promotion we were with. And they wanted to, whether it was UIW, WIN, ACW in Pennsylvania, IPW, International Pro, Lethal Arts Wrestling, all those promotions we went to, if they knew Ed was the promoter, they knew they were getting their money's worth, more than their money's worth out of the show. So, I agree. Again, even I'll give Joel all the credit in the world. I mean, Joel did that thing. Joel was the kick in the pants maybe that some of the independents needed. And to stop doing the spot shows, to try to do... I mean, Joel did continuity. He did try to bring some of his guys up, and do that. And for me, as a fan, it was fun going to Joel's shows because I'd see, other than the people you name, seeing like Kevin Von Erich. When did you ever see a Von Erich outside of Texas?
Right.
Austin Idol. The Battle of the Bam Bams. Bam Bam Bigelow versus Terry Gordy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those were the type of matches that we didn't see elsewhere. We didn't see anywhere. And even with Ed's case where we had Bob Backlund versus Paul Orndorff that wound up being featured in PWI. Mm-hmm. That was a huge deal for us, and it was a huge deal for the fans to get to see those guys. And for them, it was a boost because, as we note, and I think we've talked about before, that particular match got Bob and Paul back into WWF and WCW respectively.
Right.
Because they saw that match and they were like,
They
hey,
still can go.
hey, these guys can still go. Let's talk to them. Let's bring them back in and do that. And obviously, Bob wound up winning the title,
Right.
you know, for a second time after all those years. So, but again, it was those type of people like Ed and Dick and Joel and Larry Sharp and a few of the others that we've talked about. Dave Lehigh down in Virginia. Mm-hmm. You know, same thing. He was trying to develop his guys, and he would try to bring in the bigger talent to better his guys, not to embarrass them, not to squash them, but to make them, like we said before, step up their game a little bit. You know, and make those guys, wrestle these other guys and say, ooh, hey, the Cream Team's wrestling the Midnight Express, or, you know, and Jeff Collette was a big part of that. And you know, they would have these guys come in, and that was, to me, the key to giving the fans what they want and giving everybody who was working for the promotion what they wanted.
It was the presentation. It really was. When you would see Ed Zahn or Dick Karakoff or Larry Sharp or Joe Goodhart promoting an event, it was the presentation of the event. Like, this is something important. This means something. The lighting, the ring being in good shape, the wrestlers looking professional, everybody having proper gear. It looked like something professional. The presentation was good. You had referees that were competent. You had a good sound system that worked. And to add to what Jeff was saying, I can remember seeing Max Thrasher, the Bounty Hunter, wrestling Bam Bam Bigelow, and never once did it cross my mind that this was a one-sided match. I thought, wow, this is somebody that can go toe-to-toe with Bam Bam Bigelow, and somebody who could definitely hold their own if they were in the WWF or in the NWA or WCW and be a star themselves. If you're wrestling a star and you carry yourself as a star and your presentation is a star, you get across to the audience that you're a star. And I thought that was Ed's idea. Was to present people in the best light possible and to give people a good show. And another thing that I remember about Ed, he really wanted to promote women's wrestling.
Yes.
He's one of the very first people that I can remember that would put a women's match.
A good women's match.
Right.
Not
Not
good
a TNA
women's
show,
match.
not a
Right.
TNA.
Right.
This was
Something,
wrestling.
you had a family audience. You had to think about your presentation. You didn't want to be trashy or something that would stick out like a sore thumb. Mm-hmm. It was a professional presented ladies match with respect. The fans were seeing an actual competitive match between two lady professionals.
Right.
Well, Tim, I think your last statement, you hit upon a big key, and we've talked about it before on this show, and it was something that Ed taught me in the first business, and the key word is respect. You have to respect everyone. You have to respect the people that are working for you, and you have to, most importantly, respect the fans. And I think that's something that's missing a lot of times, and you can see it in a promotion. If they don't respect anyone, then they're just out there wasting everyone's time. And people don't like that. People want to feel that you're not insulting their intelligence. Mm-hmm. And that goes for everybody. It goes for the workers, the referees. And the other point was, and I'm going to segue it and more into my segment, is Ed knew how to get a team under him of people that we didn't always agree, but he respected us and he respected our opinions. And it wasn't the Ed Zahn show. Even though Ed was the promoter and Ed's name is associated with it, should be, Ed knew how to get people working with him, not just for him, that helped with that, because people don't understand. And again, I'll talk more in detail about it. One person can't run a promotion. You just can't do it. It's impossible to do that. So that was the other key, at least with Ed, was that he was able to find talent maybe where you didn't expect it. I mean, when Ed and I met, I was just a fan. I had never worked for a wrestling promotion. I had no idea how all that worked. Ed brought me in. He taught me everything that I know, and still teaching me to this day. Ed is definitely the Jedi Master to my Padawan. I mean, I will. Ed, there's a famous quote that most people say: he's forgotten more than most people will ever know. And I'm sure it's the same with Dick Karakoff or Dave Lehigh or Joel Goodhart. You have to have a good team under you,
right,
to be able to do all that. And I think that's the other key point why they were the success that they were at the time.
Well, and that makes them unsung, because their product is what you see, and you only remember the wrestlers in the ring.
Exactly. But
the true historians, folks who have covered it from every angle, folks who have been in it at every angle, folks who have worked in it, they recognize people like Ed and Joel and Dave and Dick and Larry. You know that those guys, they gave it to the fans, and that makes them that unsung that we're talking about. So in that same vein, Jeff, you have your side of unsung.
Right.
How would that unfold?
Well, and you hit upon it a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit first about how a show gets set up. And a lot of it is the fans don't know. So I break it down into 3 parts. There's the concept, there's the preparation, and then there's the execution. Now the fans see the execution. They see the end. They come into the building, everything's set up, the show goes on, they go home. They don't see the literal months of time and effort to go into it. So it all starts with the concept. A promoter, any promoter says, I want to do a show. They have to pick a date, they have to pick a building. Okay, usually it has to be out. They go to their team then. They have to go to their team. Okay, I need you to find me a building. I need you to cull the area. Find out what businesses are involved. Find out if there are any charity groups that are in the area, like the JCs. Like we would work through the JCs for cystic fibrosis. We did the show for SIDS. We've done the show for Ronald McDonald House.
Big Daddy.
All those type of things. Again, linking to the community. Again. Then we have to find places that we want to do posters and flyers. Then we have to do the posters and flyers. At the time we were doing the printed programs. So that all has to be done. We have to get the media outlets involved, and Julie Blanton, who's one of the greatest people around, is amazing in what she could do. Now, the good part about Julie was, because her family was in the business, Tommy, her brother, was the wrestler, Julie knew about the business, understood the nuances about the business, and was able to present that to mainstream media outlets and get the response back that we wanted. I take, obviously, the big example is the Win premiere show. She went and found out that Tony Pagnotti, the weatherman, was a huge Honky Tonk Man fan. All she had to do was tell him, we got a show, we're bringing Honky Tonk Man in for a local show for cystic fibrosis. That was all he needed to hear. He did the broadcast, the people came in droves.
Right, he was the ring announcer
that
day.
He did the weather forecast from Martin's North Point. He was outside the show. People that the other people that do things and people don't talk about, ring crew. A ring doesn't magically appear in the middle of nowhere. It's got to be.
You can't wish it there.
It can't. You can't transport. Nice. And I was lucky enough through Ed and Max Thrasher to work with Ted Petty. Ted was an absolute master at that thing.
People don't know how much behind the scenes Ted was really involved.
No, I mean he had that truck.
We do, but
That truck he had, it had the crane inside, and everything would come out. And first of all, it was like one of the most neatly packed vehicles I've ever seen. And people don't understand a ring's a big steel frame. There's a lot of wood involved. There's cabling. There's chains. It's all that. That all has to be transported to the show hours before the show. Has to be put together. You have to make sure. You have to make sure it's safe. Obviously, you want it to be safe. You have to make sure it's not. Again, because you're in someone else's building, you got to make sure it's padded underneath, not damaging the floor, And then when it's all said and done, after the whole show, it's all got to be taken back down, packed up on the truck. He's back on the road, probably on the way to the next show the next day.
He was amazing.
Absolutely
with those winches and stuff that he would have.
But again, he was another person like Ed. He had good people under him.
His brother worked with him.
Right. With it. And then, like I said, he would bring people like myself and Ed and Max Thrasher in, and we would help out, which again helped our learning process to understand when we were starting to run our own shows to try to be realistic about the expectations of, okay, they're going to need X amount of time. They need to be able to bring the truck in. We need to be able to move things around. We got to tell the building, this is what we're doing. This is what we need. People just doing setup, even like chairs. I mean, people don't realize the fans walk in the building, the chairs are there. Well, somebody had to put them up. We had to figure out a configuration. We were literally sketching on a piece of paper. We want this many rows, this many chairs. And if you did reserve seating, we'd sit there and tag
so that they
each and every chair. And then you had to have people at the door taking the fans to their chairs to make sure that they were going on. You had the people to collect the tickets. You had the people running the concession stands. None of these people were ever in the ring. None of these people, unfortunately didn't get their names out there and should have. And they are all part of and still are to this day. I mean, you can't run a promotion without these people, without people doing security. Like we talked about, like if you were doing TV, that was a whole different concept about bringing a TV crew in. You had to get the lighting, you had to get all the equipment in. Then those people had to take, at the time, they had to take everything back to the studio to edit it, to get it ready for the TV broadcast the next day. I mean, now we have people doing live broadcasts over the internet, which we didn't have back then. Photographers, like Tim, very important, still to get those pictures out. Obviously Tim has the connection with PWI Magazine. We had connections with the Sheets at the time because, again, we didn't have internet. We didn't have that capability to do that. So, again, it was a very hands-on, very intimate process. And we didn't have the money for a big staff, to be quite honest about it. So a lot of us wore many hats at that time and had to be able to spend all that time, those months, because even by the time the show happened, we were already well into the process for the next show, which was another key that Ed and Dick and all those had. They would have, and I always thought it's a key for any promotion, be ready for your next show.
Right.
Have tickets on site. Say, hey, our next show, we're doing a show November 4th at Martin's. Next month, we're going to be at the Teamsters Hall on December 13th or whatever the date was.
Right.
We have tickets available. Feel free to come on up to the ticket booth and get those tickets.
And it was multi-layered. You're saying exactly right, Jeff. In the process of doing one, you get to a certain point, you're already processing the second or your next step. And then
or even further down the line,
right,
because
and it just continues.
Because as you talked about, we tried to set up a circuit. We tried to have angles go not only for us, but we were literally cross-promotional, which sometimes happens well. Sometimes, depending where you are, it doesn't happen because you don't get that cooperation with the promotions.
Right.
So that was another thing we had to do, was to try to, we always tried to cooperate with everybody and say, oh, well, we're doing this. And they would say, oh, well, we're going to do that. Okay, that's fine. We can make that adjustment and do all that. And the other thing, too, we didn't even talk about contacting wrestlers. Again, we had no internet and everything. Hey, we got a date. Again, we had to plan it out because we didn't know, nobody had their schedule posted. We didn't have anything online. Right. So we would call you and say, hey, Ricky, we got a show on the 4th. Are you available? And you would say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not.
Right.
and then negotiate price and all that type of stuff. Have tables set up for people to sell their merchandise. Have our own merchandise put together. That was another whole thing that I think that Ed especially did well, is he understood the value of the merchandise, of the brand. It wasn't about Ed Zahn. It was about
the brand.
UIW. It was about Win. It was about ACW. That was what people were going to remember. Oh, I went to a Win show. I got a Win hat. I got the Win button. We went to the convention, Julie, with the stickers. Everybody got a sticker. Everybody got a Win sticker. Because, again, that little thing, the little details stuck in people's minds. And that's what you had to do. About getting belts put together, about doing all that kind of stuff. I mean, again, sponsorships, because, you were trying to build the promotion and, again, build the community around that. And especially if we were on the road, because we did shows. Obviously, we did Maryland shows. We did PA shows. We would do West Virginia shows. If we worked with Dave Lehigh, we were doing Virginia shows. Mm-hmm. We were doing shows with Larry Sharp and Joel in New Jersey and, in Philadelphia. So that was all part and parcel to that. And a couple of names I'll throw out there, and one of them you just had recently on the show, Andy Weinberg. Mm-hmm. Andy was one of those guys. He was there all the time. He'd get the ring jackets. He'd do all that. Never a word of complaint. Never, hey, why do I got to do this? Doing it. Now look at Andy. Exactly. Look at what now he's there. But he started off just helping out.
Paying his dues in a different manner.
Brian Holthouse is another guy.
Right,
he's
absolutely.
Another great guy who did all that stuff for us. He worked it. Jeff Amder.
Right.
My God, there was never a card in Maryland or Pennsylvania that Jeff wasn't timekeeping. Ring announcers, all those kind of people who were involved in that people didn't see, or maybe just didn't associate the names
with.
And those are all those people that I personally right now will thank every person that I've ever worked with at any promotion who did that kind of thing and never truly got the acknowledgement that they should have.
Everything that we've talked about here today is an incredible way of looking at it. Because you're right, Jeff, Tim, the behind-the-scenes folks, even though the marquee is professional wrestling, there's a lot more that goes into it than just the performers in the ring. One of the things that I did when I wrote my book was I felt exactly those sentiments, and it was a section titled Unsung Heroes. And it was about the folks like you, like Ed, like Tim, Jeff Amder. Everyone that you mentioned there were the people that I mentioned in that section. Speaking about books are an incredible way to express a lot of creativity, right? We have a close friend of ours, and I would be remiss if we didn't give this man a shout out, because he's done exactly what we're talking about here. Talking about Tyler Cates. He's created his own PCW, right? Primal Conflict Wrestling. Has been really doing well in Virginia, West Virginia, sometimes out in Western Maryland, wherever he needs to go. He's even looked at exploring in Pennsylvania, which is good. But he's also a published author. Tim, would you like to tell our fans just a little bit about Tyler and Tyler's new book?
Oh, I think Tyler's one of our unsung heroes, too.
Absolutely.
Certainly a promoter down in West Virginia who is keeping some of our traditions of professional wrestling alive, while at the same time incorporating the new athleticism and what's going on currently in wrestling, so as to make his product look current, but still respect the traditions that we all grew up on.
Yes, and he has a new book that's out.
He does have a new book that's out. It's called Dead Man's Breath by Tyler Cates. A very good read.
Right. It's a fiction story. It deals with detectives and murders and a little bit of
private investigating,
that
exactly.
Sort of thing. And
yeah.
it's actually, if you understand a little bit or know Tyler, he's put his background really into there. His professional background beyond the wrestling world.
I think so. I could see some of that in this book. It's interesting. It's got quite a few plot twists and turns, kind of like a wrestling angle, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I could see that.
So we will put a picture up for you. We'll put a link in here. might you want to reach out, and that'd be, again, one of those nice little things that we do for a fellow who's done a lot for us and for this business.
It's a really good read. I really enjoyed it, and it's available on Amazon, and I think it's less than $10.
There you go. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for joining us this week. I thank always our co-host Tim Walker and our special guest Jeff Capo for our multi-part episode talking about Unsung Heroes. We gave it to you from a couple different angles, from the workers in the ring to the people behind the scenes, which I thought was excellent. So Jeff, again, thank you for joining us in the last 2 weeks with this material. This was awesome. A great insight, different insight. This is the type of stuff that our wrestling fans usually don't get to see, but that's what we here at PIN do. We believe in the archives, and that's what we're bringing to you. So we're thanking you again for joining us. We're hoping you join us again next week as we take another look at a Pioneer. And Tim, where are we going to stroll?
Down Concussion Lane.
I can feel the headaches from here on out. Guys, thank you.
Thank you.